Thank you, folks. I had planned a grand entry for you folks here, but the technical glitch forced you all to come on board here. Anyway, thank you. So, folks, this next session is on AI automation and the emerging technologies and what kind of risks and opportunities that these new technologies pose for us. Now, I have here a very eminent panel, Brian, who's from Citi National Bank, just a couple of streets away here. Brian, thank you for joining us here. And we have Alex from DC. Where do you find from, Alex?
DC, yes.
DC last
Yes.
night. So thank you folks for taking time out and coming here to address this panel or this audience here about these very important topics. Now, Alex, if I could please ask you to introduce yourself.
Alex Gashesha, part of a third line. So my team audits anything related to AI, information security, infrastructure, as well as emerging technology at Meta.
Very good. Pardon me. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at City National Bank of Florida. There's a footbridge that goes right into my building. So when they said, "Hey, can you talk?" I was like, "Sure, I'll be right over." So no problem. But no, glad to be here. I know he's third line, but we won't hold that against you.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. So, folks, I did want to start this topic off with a personal anecdote here. Now, it's very hard to miss all the developments in AI, ChatGPT over the last few months, right? About, 8 months ago, when ChatGPT was first beta launched, it was very obvious within the first few weeks that a lot of domains are going to get disrupted by this technology. Now, one of the first areas where the disruption was very obvious was in the universities, right? Personally, in addition to my day job here at MetricStream, I also teach as an adjunct at SMU in Dallas. So when this technology came about, we had our faculty leads email all of us, right, asking us or telling us what exactly we need to do to prepare ourselves, to change our course material, to relook at the way we test our students, given this technology was so accessible. Now, obviously, I started evaluating my own tests, the processes I conduct. Now, most of my tests are open book, right? Now, this is actually a question from my midterm exam. Now, this question, by the way, so I teach the foundations of machine learning for a graduate class, right? Now, this question, in the midterm, the point of this question for me is to test the students on two things. By the time it's for midterm, I'd have taught them about 10 or 12 different types of algorithms. And the idea is to see if the students are able to identify the right tool from the toolbox to use to solve the problem and how accurately they use the tool to get to the right answer. Now, when I took this question and put it on ChatGPT, I was horrified to find that it answers this question accurately in a matter of a few seconds. Now, to this day, I haven't figured out what to do with this, right? So it's an open book exam. So I had to take this question out. But, these are the kind of challenges that we are faced with a technology like this. Now, Brian, Alex, if you guys could also share about what kind of impacts such technologies have had in the recent past in your everyday work life.
Yeah. All right. So, I think you said it correctly. It's a tool in the toolbox, and we have to treat it that way. I think for your students, allowing them to use it may be an area you start to venture into. You're teaching on a syllabus, so you can refer back to that. Say, what are the 12 algorithms are the best suited and why, kind of thing. And I think you'll get a little bit better from that. But for us, I've used it to help me develop RFPs. Where I don't put sensitive information, but I can put generic information in it, and it really spits out kind of that lump of clay that I can then further shape. So it's shaving off time that it takes for people to do their jobs, and I think we hear that a lot. Knowledge workers will be primarily affected, but it's not that the jobs will be replaced by AI. It's your job will be replaced by somebody who knows how to use AI, right? So you have to consider. I always want to reframe it as it's a tool in your toolbox. I know there's an exercise we do where it's risk of, due to, resulting in. You've heard that phraseology. I told ChatGPT, this is the formula essentially I want you to use, and let me give you some scenarios and then generate that statement for me. And it helped shave off a bunch of time for me, and of course it's up to us to determine, is it producing the correct information, right? It can still hallucinate and produce bad outputs. And so you still need a subject matter expert who can validate if that's the correct thing or not. I think audit's always going to look at your validation methodology, right? It's a huge component of their work. And so as first line and second line works together to create those proper methodologies, I think that's a key consideration.
Uh, I'll put it a couple of different ways. On a personal basis, I have a junior in college. One of the things that he would send me code and say, "Could you please debug for me?" Now ChatGPT can do that. I don't have to
Saving you time.
Yeah, it saves me a lot of time. So internally also we have tools similar to ChatGPT that can help you code. So we've developed a lot of really good efficiencies from a company's perspective where you have, you can throw in the code and it writes for you the code. The good thing about from a third line perspective, I can come in and inspect the code. I can come in and look at the logic that's used by the AI capability to be able to make sure it's doing the right thing. So it helps a lot.
Yeah, thanks for that, folks. Now, Brian, so piggybacking on what you just said, right? It's not that the jobs will get replaced, but it'll get replaced by people who know how to use these technologies. So in fact, at MetricStream, we are also grappling with one such problem, right? So as we grow our AI teams, the question for us is, do we still go back, hire the traditional, use the traditional approach of hiring machine learning scientists, or do we pivot to domain experts who know how to use the system better? So from that context, how have some of these elements of the talent that you all onboard changed, or you think will change over time?
We haven't shifted that. We haven't added like prompt engineer to job descriptions yet, right? I know that's a thing, and it will be a thing in the long run. But it's just like knowing, you've seen on resumes like proficient with Microsoft Office, right? That kind of thing. I think you're going to see more of that, where you're saying, okay, they understand how to use AI and LLM prompting to be a more efficient and capable worker. I think that's ultimately what we're going to start to see more of. So I don't know if you've observed. You're in a different situation being a large technology firm, but.
Yeah, so I think on our side, what we always emphasize on is foundational understanding of the technologies and risks, and then the flexibility to be able to adapt to new technologies. So if first line or second line adapts to something, we need to be able to quickly adapt to that as well. But we're seeing a little bit more shift into people understanding how to solve problems. Not necessarily, that you need to know all this knowledge base, but at least be able to know how to find the right answer.
The critical thinking skills, the ability to do creative problem solving, which the AI models aren't really that great at yet. That creative problem solving piece. And so again, you just have to treat it like a tool in the toolbox, which actually helps you approach it from a policy perspective, from a acceptable use perspective, technical controls and administrative controls around it, as you consider it as a tool in that vein.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for that, folks. Now, coming into one of the keywords here, right? The risk. Now, what do you see as some immediate risks that are very obvious with a technology like this? And how do you see the risk landscape change over time, right? So as these tools get more democratized.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start with a little bit more tactical. So when ChatGPT first came out, folks started using it to write code internally. There's a risk of actually sharing confidential information, and that was immediately stopped in terms of email sent out to everyone and more of education to everyone as to the right way of using ChatGPT or other generative AI type of technologies. From a more strategic view, there's a possibility that you could actually use this technology to misinform in large scale. So that's the most important thing for us, to be able to go back to the drawing board and make sure that there's no bias in the code, that we have the right level of governance within the organizations to make sure that it doesn't happen. So internally, we have something that's been in existence for a while, about 5 years now. It's called Responsible AI Organization, that makes sure there's no misinformation at large scale. But there's a big risk to that as well.
That's good. From a cybersecurity perspective, right, it's very obvious that it would become a tool for the bad guys too, right? And they would integrate those capabilities within their own approaches. But you still have to understand the attack life cycle. There's still a lot of domain knowledge required to leverage it. I think the hallucinations and the outputs being inappropriate. You may have read about there was a law firm, I think it was in New York maybe, that tried to use it to help them draft their briefings and to respond back, and they fell on their face quite hard because they just trusted whatever it was creating. I've used it too, and it generated a website that didn't exist. It'll generate, references that aren't real. And so you really have to lean in and make sure that it's a tool, and you're responsible for the outputs of that. But you can see it's going to disrupt a lot of different traditional work streams in ways we still can't even predict. I imagine high school kids right now are going to be in jobs that don't exist today. Probably even college kids, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be a major shift in our global landscape.
That makes sense. Yeah, thanks for that, folks. So now, building on that, so what kind of controls can organizations put in place to one? I think you alluded to some of those, right? A sensitive information going out, you immediately blocked it. But then, as some of this technology becomes a must-have in companies, right? So, what are some policies and controls companies can come up with?
I think from an administrative controls angle, you still got acceptable use policies that already exist, doing training and updating of those so that people are at least aware and know what the appropriate uses are. There are tools that you can bake in at the perimeters, technical controls that prevent sensitive data from going outside the organization. So if they are using ChatGPT, you can fully block ChatGPT, but then there's Bing and there's this one and that one, and it's going to be a lot of whack-a-mole to say I've blocked all AI and LLMs. And the converse of that is if you do say, well, we did block this one and that one, the scrutiny will be, why didn't you block all of them? And now you're down a rabbit hole of, well, we can only block these for X, Y, Z reason. And I think that could be a difficult place from even a legal perspective if something happened, or when the auditors show up and say, I see you chose to block these 2, but not those 18, right? So you got to be a little careful with how you do that. But I think education of your workforce is the biggest piece. If you go maybe one layer deeper, if you have a solid inventory of all the key business processes in your organization, you need to re-update those business impact assessments and actually understand, are they using these to help as a part of their tools in their toolbox? And then again, it's just that organizational shift to understanding how to properly use them and when it's appropriate and when it's not.
I think from a third line perspective, one of the things that I always expect to find is a little bit more active governance of new technologies. It's changing exponentially. So what you have now as use cases might be totally different in the next couple of months. So what I'm looking is for a cross-functional governance group that makes sure that at least things are done correctly. I think that's foundational, and making sure that at least you have all the potential use cases, all the current use cases, potential use cases are somewhat inventoried. Because what happens is that you begin to have different variations here, different variation. If you don't have a view into that, it's hard for you to be able to govern that. So governance is key. Foundational to that is making sure that at least you have a complete inventory of what's been done.
I'd say add it to your risk register. That's a key step. Very early, we added it to our top and emerging risks that we were tracking with regard to board reporting. So we made it a very prominent topic at each layer of governance, second line, third line, the management committees, board committees. And that's you have to talk about it. You have to document that you are talking about it and make it a prominent topic of discussion.
All right. So now switching gears a bit on regulations, right? Now this is one of those areas where there seems to be a bipartisan consensus that there needs to be regulation around AI. So what are your thoughts on, where should the regulations start, and who are those right entities to regulate this kind of technology?
In the financial sector, well, in all sectors, right? We look to the Federal Trade Commission, right? That they're primarily responsible or looking at consumer harm and the unfair practices and deceptive practices. UDAP is a key piece of legislation that drives a lot of what speaking from financial services, that drives a lot of the decision making we do and the types of controls that we implement for certain programs, more client-facing items. So I feel like the FTC is going to have a big role. NIST certainly as maybe not as a regulatory agency, but as a government body that could provide the guidance and start to set those guardrails. I'm sure they're already working on this and have for a while. I don't recall if there's any major publications lately. But I think between those two agencies,
NIST RMF,
okay,
AI RMF was published a few months back.
There you go.
But it's
a few months back, a little behind. And I know Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, he briefed Congress and he's made recommendations in the past and then about establishing a new agency who's purposeful around this. I don't know, I don't know how deeply that permeated into the bowels of government to say, "Ooh, a new agency, let's do it," right, kind of thing. So we'll see how that unfolds. I think they want to probably use an existing agency and instead of create a new one.
Yeah. I'm a huge proponent of government regulation because it sets up level playing ground for everyone else. I'm glad to see that the U.S. is doing something. I think the president had 5 principles. That's sort of foundation into building the AI regulatory framework that comes up in the next, probably could be 18 months, could be 24 months. But on the other side, EU has also come up or is in the process of coming up with regulatory compliance requirements. But devoid of all of that, regardless how long it takes for that to happen, I think it's still good to have good business practices. So internally, we leverage NIST. They've come up with a really good framework to help do the right thing from the ground up, as opposed to waiting until someone else comes in and lets you know that you need to open up your 1,000 models, and see what the bias is in all of that. So it's easy for us to be able to build from the ground up by leveraging NIST, for example, as a framework.
Yeah, thanks for that. Now, building on that though, right? Do you all see any dangers, or put another way, what could be some recommendations or framework that these government bodies could keep in mind so they don't end up shackling this sort of a technology? Again, it's in the nascent stage, and creative people are figuring out different ways of using it. Now, if we start shackling it with regulations, what happens to what could actually come out of all this, right? Had it been unfettered. What are your thoughts? Where do you balance?
I think it's always good to understand, and sometimes what happens is that you don't fully understand the use cases. So I think it's always good to bring in the creatives, the technology folks, as well as the folks who are writing the regulatory compliance requirements, because you want to make the guardrails wide enough, but still targeted enough to make sure at least you're addressing the key risks. So I think creating guardrails that are wide enough to allow the creative industry to be able to come up with interesting solutions, but at the same time, just key things like bias, key things like privacy, security, are governed the right way.
Yeah, I think we're in a society where we're all everyone's trying to make that dollar bill, right? And so I think that you're gonna have these companies, they're all for the regulation, but they're also gonna keep heading as fast as they can because it's a bit of an arms race. So I don't know, even if they had regulation come out tomorrow, like I said, it's going to be really wide guardrails, and I think they're going to. It's really about the spirit of what they're intending to make these tools do for us as a society. I know that recently there was I think 5 or maybe 10 signatories on a. It was a simple statement that said, "We'll do this for the betterment of humankind" and things like that. They didn't really agree to do certain things and not other things, but they at least all agree this is a very powerful, like the nuclear bomb or the printing press, or it will change the world. And I think that they're at least taking it in stride in that vein. But I think there's still a lot to be unveiled about this.
So is that the precedence, right? So when we talk about regulations, or even companies look at handling risk, we always try to look for precedents in the past to see if we can piggyback on such experiences. For a technology like this, what do you think has been the most recent precedents that companies can piggyback on, use that experience?
Digital banking and crypto were probably more recent examples where you've got very new technologies trying to achieve similar but different things, and at speeds that most of your average persons couldn't really keep up with. I think now we're all a little more comfortable, but just like cloud's probably another one, cloud adoption. Everybody, oh, the cloud. It's like, oh, it's just somebody else's data center. Let's calm down. There's still specific controls and things we need to be mindful of with our data, access controls, etc. So I think you can look to those and the way that government responded, the way that regulatory, NIST, other bodies tried to respond and create or incubate those controls around. You'll probably find a similar response, I would hope. Again, it's just a tool in our toolbox.
Yeah.
Right?
I think underlying AI is a capability similar to any other technology. Underlying all of that is information. So we currently have regulatory compliance requirements on privacy, for example, GDPR, CCPA. I think that's the same way that I look at it in terms of sort of like a framework that can be able to govern this a little bit.
Goes back to data management. Have that inventory, know who's using it, who's touching it, how it's being used.
Excellent. Yeah. So especially those examples on the crypto and cloud, so they're very relevant recent experiences to piggyback on for sure. Excellent. So now we've been talking about risks and regulations more on the doom and gloom sort of topics, right? But let's just switch gears. Now, what are some opportunities that tools like these provide? And are we just at the scratching the surface in terms of the opportunities that these tools can provide today?
You're almost speaking about risk treatment, right? An exploitation of
Yeah.
risk. I think that's one of the very rarely, in my opinion, I've never actually had a chance to say, let's exploit that risk, right? And I feel like this is a unique opportunity where we could probably start to use that term in our documentation a little more if we're going to make a conscious decision as an organization to use these tools in business for business purposes. So I think that's probably the name of the game is how do you thoughtfully and responsibly exploit this risk to your advantage. I don't know if I'm using that term maybe academically correct, but I feel like that's, we're kind of venturing into that space a little bit.
I think there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of fear as well, but there's exponential potential, especially as using AI. One of the things that we've done successfully, and I've seen done successfully, is, for example, threat analytics, is where you're looking at data from the outside, looking at the capabilities inside, and it provides you specific recommendations on where to patch the gaps. There are things like that that we can be able to enforce. I think projections are about 2025 will have a shortfall of cybersecurity professionals by 50%. We can patch the gap using AI as a capability to be able to at least start scaling in terms of people, process, and technology as well. So embracing it responsibly, I think, would be the key.
Thank you, folks. So, so the room here, we have a lot of risk leaders, folks that are responsible for risk management within their firms. Right? Now, what would be some 2 or 3 prescriptive steps that they could take away from this session, right? As soon as they go back, these are some things that we could actually operationalize when it comes to embracing AI risk.
I think, again, adding it to your risk register and making it a type of risk that you are crafting policy around, that you're looking at treatment options for, having that communication. I think larger entities may be able to form special committees, other entities who have a technology committee, that needs to be a prominent topic of discussion. Again, those business processes that have been, there's a lot of automation these days in your key business processes, but revisiting those BIAs and those evaluations about, what technologies you're using to facilitate that. I think those are all kind of some key next steps. I don't know if we'd be ready to generate a new AI policy yet, but you want to start the gears turning on how to produce that.
Yeah, I think just in addition to that, it's more or less just acknowledging the potential for AI and being able to embrace it. Some of it, there's a lot of fear around it, but there's a lot of really, really good potential around it. So a little bit of embracing it and training folks on how to use it responsibly. You can block it from a company laptop, but I have my cell phone, I can still be able to get the same information. So, knowing and having that acknowledgement of this technology and see how it can be used, I think will help a lot. Forming risk committees around it, I think, and having active discussions about this, even at the board level, will help a lot. Use cases are changing every single day. So having some sort of governance with a risk committee and at least, more of the day-to-day activities that are happening, I think that will help a lot. And a lot of us have been in the industry for 20 plus years. Engage the folks who are coming in from school, because this is their bread and butter. This is what they know how to do. So having active conversations with them about the use cases, I think will help a lot.
An excellent point, Alex, especially engaging the new generation of folks.
Yes.
All right, folks, I could continue on, but Pat slowly making her way onto the stage, ready to bounce me off. So thank you, folks, and presume we'll be around. I believe, do we break for lunch now, Pat?